So, dear viewers, present you the next speaker, Alan Marcus from Moonee, with a speech regarding creating a shareable game experience. Marcus, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Okay, thank you guys for having me. As you said before, I'm Alan Marcos. I'm from Moonee, and we are going to talk about creating a shareable game experience. Now, what that means basically is that we can divide it into two categories, okay? The first one being subject matter, and the second one, we're going to call it background noise, okay? Something like we like to call B-roll. But before that, I want to talk about the first kind of hyper casual game that many people call it. We're going to talk about Flappy Bird, okay? I want to go back about a decade ago, let's say 2013. It was named by many really the first hyper casual game, a very famous game, had immense success, was simple enough for people to get the hang of, and was frustrating and super challenging in its gameplay. These emotions that evoke from players is what made people want to beat each other and share the experience with each other. That's the impact that made the game rise so quickly to the top. And I want you people to remember this because this is something very important to make something very shareable. Okay. At that time, social media back then wasn't the way it is now. The ones we did have back then weren't as prominent or as known like today. I mean, yeah, we had YouTube, but it had this sort of niche sketch content. We had Facebook that wasn't very video oriented. Google Plus, rest in peace. There's not much to say about it. It kind of failed. But today we have a lot of social media platforms that are basically very identical to each other. If back then Instagram was focused on photos and LinkedIn was focused on work things and Reddit was focused on forums, ever since TikTok became prominent and became very popular, everything was heading towards video content. Today, everything is dominated by video content. You have pretty much overall everything is the same in its video consumption. Everything is smartphone oriented portrait mode content, which is super beneficial to the hypermarket because we can share our ads in each platform. We can share our work if it's on LinkedIn, if it's on TikTok, if it's on Twitter. Like I said before, everything is dominated by video content. Even so, we can see on the reels that TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, they look almost identical in how they do their feed and how everything is more video oriented. You know, it's less about writing posts and pictures. It's more about the video. It's always about the video. So I'm going to talk about what we can do to increase our chances to be shareable in a bit. But before that, I want to talk about the contrast to Flappy Bird's popularity, which relied heavily on negative feedback and frustration from a challenging experience. I want to talk about what we focus today in the hyper-casual market. We focus on a more relaxing, a more relatable experience in general. Some of them being games you can mindlessly watch in the background. You can zone out to, similar to how you're in the passenger seat in a car and you're just watching the road go by while listening to music. We've been seeing Reddit confessions that have, Minecraft gameplay in the background is sort of a container, if you will, for other content. Creators can place their own content, paste it on a game running in the background, whether it's a Minecraft obstacle course, a hyper runner, or a Tetris. There's something hypnotizing about the experience of letting your eyes just wander and focus on the background while really not focusing on anything. And all the while, like listening to music, like being in autopilot mode. This makes the game easier to get shared around because content creators can use it for more than just gameplay. You're listening to stories while having something to look at. It's important to note that this isn't a get viral quick scheme. This is more to show how we can use virality as a tool, as a guiding tool for organic growth and how to better utilize it rather than looking at it as an end goal. So this thing that we're looking at right now, what we call B-roll footage, is that sort of content, one of the two types of shareable content, right? So we said we have the subject matter and we have background noise. This is the type of thing that we call B-roll footage. That means in the hyper, it's more attached to runners, right? So you have audio confessions, mainly on TikTok, also the text confessions that you're seeing on screen. And we can use, for example, runners as the background for such a thing. Now, we've talked about what it is to create a shareable content. Now, we're going to talk about why we want to share, why we want to create a shareable experience. Okay, so let's get what are the benefits of making these types of games? What do I as a developer gain from this, right? So when a game goes viral and gets shared a lot, odds are you're going to get users who are looking for that exact thing. They're coming from outside sources like influencers, word of mouth, news feeds, free users that aren't from acquisition or any publisher's plan of acquisition. They are your organic users. So the main point of this would be to gain those organic users, meaning organic, meaning free. So you have a plan of buying, let's say, 1,000 users. If your player base is 1,000 users based on the acquisition, it doesn't mean much. But on the other hand, if you buy 1,000 users and you see your player base getting to 3, 4, 5,000, you're doing something right. The game is popular enough that the player base, the players you bought, are doing the work for you. So each of them is basically telling a friend, showing it on Instagram, posting on Facebook, showing on TikTok, and then it gains more and more traction because the game is interesting enough. And a way to measure this sort of growth would be the K factor. So the K factor is a way to measure if your game is going viral. It's used to link organic installs to user acquisition. What this means is basically that when the K factor is higher than 1, the game is soaring and getting more popular. If it's around 1, it's sustainable and remains stable. But if it's below 1, the game's popularity is in rapid decrease and something's going wrong. So I explained earlier about what do we mean by shareable game experiences. So the two types of shareable experiences, like I mentioned before, is the B-roll footage that we've seen, and the second one is the subject matter. We have two perfect examples of the different types of shareable games that I like to talk about, which are Make Overrun and Find the Alien. Both reach top charts, both have above 50 million downloads on both platforms, but they went viral for different reasons. Make Overrun started with below average results in all aspects, 0.5 CPI, 250 playtime, 10% retention. Controls were badly implemented, content was very limited, and the basic gameplay wasn't very exciting. And before we decided to kill it, we saw an increase in users in the US. The game turned out to be trending on TikTok. The reason it got so popular is because of the audio confessions, as we said earlier, but the B-roll footage. The main content was the audio aspect, or the confessions, if you will, which brought a lot of organic traffic, and in this instance had an even greater engagement rate than bought users. So the organic users we were seeing from the TikTok trend were having a lot higher engagement, meaning higher retention, higher play time. This serves as the reason to justify continuing to work on the game. And after some tweaking and additions, metagame, character creator, refined controls, level redesign, the game reached an RT and a retention of almost 40% and playtime of almost 800. And all this because of the organic growth that we've seen beforehand, which was based on the exposure it got on TikTok. Had it not been shared and trending on TikTok, the game would most likely be dead. So because of the extra work in the TikTok jumpstart, it went on to reach the top charts. Now, let's talk about the second type of shareable experience, the subject matter. The subject matter type of shareable game means that the focus is on the game itself rather than having it be in the background. We've talked about the B-roll footage. We've talked about the background noise, how you can have runners and audio confessions, text confession based. We've talked about how the monotonous and the background, the relaxing motion can be used as a container for content creators to put their own content on. But this is different. So Find the Alien had huge success in social and influencer market. It was very easy to create content based on the game, to talk about it. It has humorous scenes, silly gameplay, storyline from start to finish. One of the only, if not the only game in the hypermarket with an end to the story. This made it easy for content creators to use for their benefit because they could make Let's Plays and jokes about the game, much like how PewDiePie and Markiplier have made a lot of amounts of gameplays over horror games. This is the main difference between the other type of shareable game, right? So the subject matter is focusing on the content. The type of experience we're focusing on with the subject matter is the content itself. It is the action. It is the subject, unlike the B-roll footage where you have the action being in the middle and then something in the background. This is what we want to share, essentially. So these are two very different types of ways to make your game shareable. And we've seen how they can both work very well. But now we want to talk about how we can make it shareable. So we've talked about what it means to create a shareable experience, right? We've talked about the two types of what we have. We've talked about why we want to make it shareable, right? We have the organic users, the free users. We want to be trending and viral, but the virality isn't the end goal, is how to use it, right? How we can use it as a guiding tool to get there. So now we're going to talk about how we can do that. Well, we have three main points, and the first one is relatable narrative or familiar stories. When we're talking about relatability, we want to know what resonated with people, what made them feel a certain way, what emotions did the game invoke in them. In Makeover Run, it's about the old Cinderella story, rags to riches. You start from a familiar scene. A pathetic girl needs to get the good-looking guy, and as corny, as simple as it sounds, it's something that at least subconsciously resonates with people. Everyone wants to succeed, whether it's in school, in the workplace, whether it's being popular. The game uses those experiences as the basis for its content. At the start of the game, the girl is rejected, she gets bullied, she's laughed at, you feel sorry for her, you want to help her get successful and make her get the good-looking guy. And as simple as the game is, it does a very good job of getting that strong feeling from players. The same thing with Find the Alien. You have that Among Us kind of narrative, the traitor's story arc, the feeling of who could it be? Maybe the dog, maybe even your wife, maybe the neighbor. It's a story that's familiar and invokes a strong sense of curiosity. People want to figure out who the alien is. In this case, we also started with a short narrative scene. A kid walks into his parents' bedroom to find one of them as the alien. It's interesting. It's very humorous. Ultimately, you want the emotions you evoke in the players, whether it's fear, horror, cringe, frustration. It needs to be an emotion people can laugh at the end. That's the most important part. It's something you want to share with people. So we have the narrative, right? A familiar story, something people can connect to. But at the same time, you want to evoke some sort of strong emotion. And that emotion that you evoke in them has to be eventually something you can laugh at, has to be something funny, right? Because if it's something sad, sometimes people feel awkward to share it, awkward to maybe comment on it. You want it to be humorous at the end, whether it's something curious, whether it's something hilarious, whether it's something terrifying. Essentially, you want people to be able to laugh at that. So another point we have is unique and novel design. So we're not talking about having the most original prototype or idea, but rather building off familiar concepts and working them up to have new and fun mechanics. In Makeover Run's case, it takes the makeup, the fashion themes, it fuses them together to make a runner makeup hybrid game, something that hasn't been done at that time. We had maybe 2 or 3 other games that weren't doing exactly that didn't have a sort of narrative. They were mainly focused on mechanics. But this was its own thing. And same thing with Find the Alien. You have an iconic theme. You have the alien, the invader, the one that's gonna kill us all. And you have these new mechanics. You have a scanner. You have the ray gun. You have sort of a dual wheel thing going on that, again, was never really seen before in the hypermarket. So you have assets that weren't exactly custom made. They weren't something special, something too unique. They were something that you could get out of the asset store, but then just worked on a bit. You have these cartoony and cutesy characters together with these mechanics. It created something that was really new. Same thing with Makeover Run. You had a basic runner. It's not something we haven't seen before. It's something very generic. But then you see the transformation, and then you see how the makeup affects, and then you see the narrative. It creates this whole different experience altogether. So these main things is what gave them their own personality, and that's the most important part in these things: the narrative, the emotion, the unique design. Eventually, you want your game to have its own personality, because if you're going to make countless copycats and clones of the same games, you're not really doing anything to stand out in all of that. Imagine how you see all the reels and all the same content on the same platforms, if it's on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. You can see the same game, the same types of games shared on all platforms. You get tired of it. You want to stand out. You want to be special, but it doesn't have to be original. It should be fairly unique and novel. So in conclusion, we have these main key points that can help us increase our odds at becoming a more shareable game. A relatable and familiar narrative, like we said before, it has to be a story that people can relate to, a known story. Okay, we have to have strong reactions and emotions. If your game can evoke a certain emotion in players, whether it's curiosity or horror or laughter, it has to be something very powerful, very clear, yet subtle in the game itself. Eventually, something people can laugh at, and having a unique and novel design. This means with mechanics, this means with the aesthetics itself, this means with the personality of the game, right? We said you can have a very generic genre, a very generic platform, but then you have to build on top of that something fairly unique. Maybe mix it up a bit, maybe have a not just one twist, but a twist big enough to make it original on its own. So having all these parts, I believe that we can increase our odds in making a shareable and creative experience, not only as gameplay wise, because we've talked about the subject matter and we've talked about the sort of B-roll and background noise footage. So when we talk about creating a shareable experience, it has to be its own thing, whether it's something that you're targeting it as people can create content on top of that, which is a very smart thing to do, or you want to focus on the content itself, like Find the Alien, that you want people to look at the game, talk about the game, share it because of how it is. So these two types are something that we found that could be very interesting to try and share, very interesting to try and work on. And that's it. That's it for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was so much interesting and so important topic. Really, so much innovation. I have a couple of questions from myself. That's a good part of being a moderator. Actually, you can ask first. How to understand that you have exactly this moment which is funny enough to share. If I create a game, I think it's funny all around. But is it funny enough to be shared?
Yeah, it has to be subtle enough. You can't just have someone throwing a pie at someone's face and say, "Oh, this is funny, slapstick comedy," and whatever. It has to be subtle. It has to be connected within the narrative itself, right? Because you see a story, you look at Cinderella, you might not laugh, but having that Cinderella narrative, and you see a girl all dirty and all poor like, and it's being bullied, and it's something you can laugh about. It might sound a little mean, but it's something you can laugh about with friends when you share it. The same thing if it's something silly enough or crazy enough, but that can be connected within the narrative and makes sense and is logical enough and doesn't just come out of the blue. a lot of people, obviously you can't cater to everyone. Obviously not everyone's going to laugh at something, but you can pretty much guarantee that a lot of people will laugh at it.
Thank you. The second question is about the word narrative. So the narrative in its classic meaning from video games is absent at hyper casual games. You don't have someone telling you the story. You don't have some cutscenes running on your screen. So how much of the narrative it should be there? In which form? So it's not too much. It's correctly used in terms of genre?
Well, it very much depends on what type of game you're making. Obviously, we have two different games, and both of them succeeded very much. So in Makeover Run's case, the narrative isn't in your face. It's not like do this, do that, and it's a basic runner, but the wrapping of the narrative, meaning how you go from A to B, you start from a very simple scene. So you're doing this girl getting the guy, right? And you're building on top of that. It's a sort of narrative. If you look at it, it basically really resonates within players, whether it's boys or girls, right? As a girl, you're saying, okay, I want to make myself better. I want to get fashionable. I want to make myself better. And the narrative, the genius thing about it is that the basic narrative is within the game itself, within the progression, within the gameplay, right? It's a basic runner, and all you're doing is moving side to side, but you have a defined end goal, you have a defined start goal, you're changing yourself, you're going from point A to point B, and the change, the transformation you're doing within the game, that's the narrative within that game. In Find the Alien, it's 180 degrees to the other around. So you have a very specific narrative, a very defined story. You start the game, you have an alien king that you have to find at the end. You're going through the levels, trying to find what's going on. There's a storyline, there's text and everything. So it's very different on both games. You have on one side a very defined narrative, a very defined story, and something very specific that you're showing the players because you want them to focus on the content itself. You want them to focus on the gameplay, on what's going on, talk about the progression of it. And then on Makeover Run, you want people to just look at it as it is, something in the background. You see it's shareable because of what it is, but the narrative isn't in your face. It's something on backstage.
Thank you so much, Alan. I'm afraid we're running out of time for the presentation. So, guys, please chase Alan on Pine and in the chat. Try to reach out on LinkedIn because what you have presented is really, really awesome and very valuable. I believe everyone would like to go deeper and study step by step your presentation. Chase Alan, guys. And Alan, thank you so much for
thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye.